sure sign that that there's a reversal on its way. But more than that, when you connect candlesticks with cyclic theory, and in particular Hurst cyclic theory, it is a sure sign of what Hurst described as fundamental interaction. Now, I spent a little bit of time speaking about fundamental interaction a few weeks ago, but let me just speak about it a little bit more here, because I suspect fundamental interaction happened in August of 2011 in Australia, and it's important that we understand it, because I suspect that there might be some fundamental interaction happening right now. We're right in the midst of it. So it's worth spending a little bit of time just talking about fundamental interaction and understanding it fully, because it is actually an important aspect of Hurst's cyclic theory. Okay. What is fundamental interaction? Let me just change the scaling of this chart so that I can so that I can demonstrate it monthly, daily. There we go. Okay, and let's zoom in just on this period over here. Okay, now what is fundamental interaction? Hurst claimed that, of course, cycles, a multiple number of cycles influence prices to move up and then down. Okay, in a cyclical nature. They move up and then they move down. So most of what we speak about on charts is, of course, the cycles and what they're doing. Is the 40-day cycle moving up or down? Is the 18-month cycle moving up or down? When was the trough of the cycle? And all that kind of thing. Performing an analysis using Hurst cyclic theory is a fascinating process. It's a pattern recognition process, and one looks at prominent troughs and one tries to pin the troughs of all the cycles that we know are active in the market onto those particular price troughs. However, sometimes the process of performing an analysis can be made complicated by something that Hurst described as fundamental interaction. What is that? Fundamental interaction is when something that has nothing to do with cycles, generally a news event occurs, which causes people to panic, or perhaps to be suddenly manic and to be very enthusiastic and to buy tremendously. The two are very closely related. Whether prices are moving up or moving down doesn't really matter. The fact is, fundamental interaction is a period of time when prices move generally very fast because of something that has nothing to do with cycles. It might be a news event. For instance, as a South African, I can tell you, South Africans, and probably many people all over the world, know that the greatest South African hero, Nelson Mandela, whenever he experiences a health scare, and everybody thinks that his time is up, you get a tremendous amount of fundamental interaction in the South African stock market, because people enter a sort of a panic stage. They think that his health is going to be directly related to the performance of the stock market. Of course, I don't believe it is, but that's a separate subject, really. So fundamental interaction is anything from the outside, and it could be anything. It's very hard to put your finger on it, but it's often something that's reported in the news. A tsunami will certainly do it. Anyway, a whole range of possible things, disasters or positive things. The releasing of economic figures sometimes can cause fundamental interaction. What it means is that there is something that has nothing to do with cycles and has nothing to do with the pattern that the market is making in its natural way using cycles, and that fundamental interaction comes along. It's a bit of news that causes everybody to panic, and as a result, the market does something that is non-cyclical, if you like. Now, I believe that something like that happened in August of 2011, and I know I spoke about this a few weeks ago, but I'm going to draw this whole discussion back to what's happening at the moment in the Australian market, and see whether see whether I can draw any conclusions, see whether I have any valid comments to make about that. Let's have a look at what happened in August of 2011. The market was, of course, heading down, and it came down very strongly, and it formed another. Jitendra can probably help out with the, with the name of that. Is that another hammer? But there's a candlestick bar there, which has got a long shadow, a long tail below the bar, and a fairly small body. And those kinds of bars often form not necessarily on fundamental interactions as a matter of interest. They often do form on valid and true troughs, but they are sometimes an indication that fundamental interaction has occurred. Now, what are the signs of fundamental interaction? I see Nathan says, how about an earnings report? Yes, exactly. Releasing of an earnings report will often cause fundamental interaction because people assume that an earnings report has some meaning in terms of the price movement of the market. Of course, I believe it has absolutely no meaning whatsoever, apart from causing temporary fundamental interaction. But we could spend several hours debating that point. I know maybe many of you are feeling a little shocked about that. But certainly I believe earnings reports have little or no connection to the actual price movements of markets. But so certainly earnings reports will often cause fundamental interaction. Now, where was that? Yes. How do you distinguish between fundamental interaction and true cyclical movement? Now, there's the complicated thing because you can't really. It's a very subtle business. You could say, oh, that's fundamental interaction about a lot of things, but here are two rules of thumb that I'm going to give you about fundamental interactions that you can use to decide whether a period of price action is in fact fundamental interaction or not. The first rule of thumb is that if a price movement can be described as fundamental interaction, then it gets retraced very quickly. So at some point in this downward move, and this downward move here was a genuine cyclical move. How do I know that? Well, because it was happening all over the world. And when movements happen all over the world, that's a sure sign that, in fact, it's a pretty genuine cyclical move. At some point, fundamental interaction not interrupted this move, but bolstered it and sent it spiraling even further downwards. I suspect that it happened on this day, Monday, the 8th of August. That's when I suspect it happened, or even in fact, just on the Tuesday, the 9th of August, 2011. So the first rule of thumb is that fundamental interaction gets very quickly retraced. Okay, so in other words, if I'm saying fundamental interaction was on only the one day, the 9th of August, price very quickly moved down and then immediately moved pretty much straight back up again. That's a sure sign that fundamental interaction has occurred. Of course, you can't use that as the only measure of fundamental interaction because that kind of thing happens pretty much near every single trough. Okay, near pretty much all troughs, you get a quick move coming down and a quick move bouncing back up again. Okay, so that on its own isn't a sure sign of fundamental interaction. What is the second rule of thumb to determine whether something is a sign of fundamental interaction? Well, if after the fundamental interaction has occurred, if the general movement of the cycle continues and forms later a more valid peak or trough, then you can look back and you can say, that was fundamental interaction. Now, I know that sounds vague, and unfortunately, it is a little vague. Okay, and it's unfortunately the kind of thing that you can only do looking back, which is why when I say I suspect we might be experiencing some fundamental interaction at the moment, I say it with a great degree of caution, because it's almost impossible to say whilst you're in the midst of a period of fundamental interaction, it's almost impossible to say, yes, we are in the midst of a group of fundamental interaction in the market, because you can only say it with any real validity after the fact. But why do I think this was a period of fundamental interaction? Well, all the markets around the world were in the process of moving down towards a trough. Okay? All the markets in the world, and we're going to take a look at the US market in a moment. I'm going to show you the US market. You're probably all familiar with it, but you will know that on the 4th of October, US markets and markets worldwide formed a major trough of at least 18 months significance. Now, as you can see, the Australian market had this period of sudden move down over here in August. It dropped down in what looks like a bit of a panic sell, and then it bounced straight back up again. And then it kept on going down, and it did form a valid trough, a nicely formed trough on the 4th of October. Let me clear this board. So if we ignore only 1 week's worth of price action, if we ignore that, if I cross that out so you can't see it, so all we're left with is are the bars that you can now clearly see, then in fact it looks like the market is moving down in a fairly nice cyclical manner, and forming the most prominent trough on the 4th of October. Now, you see, I think that is what most likely happened, because the US markets formed that very prominent trough on the 4th of October. Let's take a look at them. Let's go into the US indices workspace and go and look at the same time period. And let's turn off these FLDs, and let's find where October. So let's zoom in on roughly the same sort of time period. Now here you can see, let's go back a little bit. Here you can see that the US markets also formed a trough on the 9th of August, but that was a trough of only 80-day magnitude. In other words, it was an 80-day cycle trough. That's over here on the 9th of August, and on the 4th of October. The US markets formed an 18-month cycle trough. Okay, so